sort of stuff.
Times out like
I wonder if it's recording now. Unless some got unplugged over here. There.
You're not giving any consideration of the shapes of the mountain, the cliffs behind there right now.
No, they're so broken up, you're not going to really see it other than, as I said, you're going to see over here where the cliffs are lower, you're going to see a lot more blue. Over here where they're higher, you're going to see less. So a lot of this blue is going to go away, unfortunately, because I like the way it came out, but sometimes you just got to make a sacrifice. These cliffs, excuse me, are that high, and so you're not going to see a whole lot of blue water down here, but you will over here. So for instance, here, I've got to follow that same spacing. I'm going to get sort of a pale orange, but I'm going to have to get rid of that blue.
Ooh, you did too.
Well, not yet, but I will.
A man of courage. Wow.
So if you're
Actually, watercolors cannot hurt you. You could get a paper cut, but that's about it.
Or eat cadmium yellow.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
A little bit.
you could poison somebody with watercolors.
I killed butterflies when I was doing plein air. They crawl in my pants.
Oh, poor
And then
thing.
and I thought, oh, how beautiful, and then they keeled over.
And then they killed
Were they
over.
the monarchs?
I felt
Was it
terrible.
just recently, you mean?
It was
Oh.
7 years ago.
Well, if it's a good-looking butterfly, you just take a pin and push it to your paper.
I did.
You know.
It was a number 88 in the Amazon.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. You know, they have an 88 in the wing pattern.
An 88. Yeah.
I've heard of that.
Black and white and red.
Oh my.
So hey, that's the way to collect butterflies in the Amazon. Do this commercially, right? Just go down there with a bunch of cadmium yellow and here, butterfly. Right?
Put some honey next to it.
Well, that's one of the reasons you're there. I mean, you know, watercolor paints are made with either honey or high fructose corn syrup. That's the vehicle. And so.
It's not gum arabic or tragacanth anymore?
Well, they have some gum arabic in it, but the main, you know.
Especially M. Graham.
Yeah, M. Graham
there's all
uses
that.
honey.
Right, right.
Most of them use corn syrup, but they all have, they all basically have a sugar ingredient. That's one of the things that hardens up when the paint hardens.
Gum Arabic.
They have that too, yeah. And
Are you going to discuss the chemistry of paint, watercolor paint, in this workshop?
that was sort of beyond the scope of the.
You just got it.
That's it.
That was it. Don't blink.
So, David, what yellow are you using there? Is it the Rossiana?
No, that's probably
Cad?
a little. Well,
Is that
it's
cad?
not actually cadmium. I think that's Windsor yellow, which is a, you know, the same general hue as cadmium yellow, but it's less poisonous.
Then why do you make us drink
Hi.
cadmium?
Yes, thank you, Mel. It was on the supply list.
That's because most people call it cadmium yellow, and you know,
And why
I
did you
have
do
found that no matter how many times I specify a given manufacturer, nobody does that. So I use, you know.
Yeah.
There you go.
We did.
Good.
Ordered paint I've never used.
So
Good.
why did you take that out? Was it not the right color, or it just wanted it lighter? What you put it in and then you took it
Okay,
out?
now you remember what I've been saying about you let the water sit on the paper for a while and then it
Oh, you
dissolves the
took out
paint.
the blue.
I took out the blue.
Oh, okay.
The blue's gone.
It sounds the yellow.
Well, he
But how
was
come you
chatting
painted
That's
about
it?
okay.
it.
Why do you
The
paint it
paper
orange?
is yellowish now.
Okay.
These reflections are going to be reflections of the cliff, which is orange, right?
Okay.
So you don't want that blue in there. So all that time I was chatting and talking and everything else, I was waiting for the water to dissolve, and then I hit it with a paper towel, and the blue's
Thank you.
up.
But why did you paint it with orange instead of just clear water?
I wanted to get a leg up on making it orange.
There's a remnant of the orange there.
Yeah.
It's just a
Short.
shadow of
A
it.
little bit of it stayed in. One of the reasons it stayed in is because the particular blue is ultramarine blue and it's particulate. Whereas in this case, both the yellow, the Windsor yellow, and the quinacridone magenta are pretty much staining colors, so they're going to stay in, you know. So I can turn it from yellow to blue just by laying these things on the paper for a while, and then, I mean, from blue to yellow, excuse me, and then the blue comes up.
So what you're mainly doing is lifting the color rather than, but you're putting color in.
I'm putting some color in at the same time I'm lifting it because I want to see.
It's magic.
As I said, this is just, I'm designing and building up the waves.
Yeah, because I was wondering why you were producing a shape and then kind of looked like putting an extra water in and removing some of the center and making it lighter.
Yeah, well,
It becomes clear.
I can still see the shape,
Right.
you know. And if I use clear water, it would be a little bit harder to see where I was drawing
What
these
you were trying to
reflection patterns in. I want to be able to see what I'm doing where, you know, especially when the paint dries, if you just use just bare water, you got to kind of squint and say, okay, did I intend for that to be cliff reflection or, you know, what's happening there? As it is, I have a pretty good idea because the yellowish areas are where the reflection of cliff's going to be. Now, the hardest part of what I've been doing is what I really haven't been talking about while I'm doing it, because I can't really think of a good way to describe it, but I'm just, I'm doodling, you know, making these designs. And as I said, they're sort of random designs, but following my perspective lines. You know, I'm making up a pattern as I go along.
So you're not really thinking about the cliff, the shape, or the colors in the cliff. You're thinking about
Not yet,
pattern right
no.
now. You're laying
Now,
out.
what's going to happen as far as the colors and the reflections of the colors in the cliff? I'll show you in a second here. First I have to get the design. What is blue sky reflection and what's reflecting the cliff color? I mean, that's the important thing for me to get right now, is just lay out that design. And then, when everything's dried up nicely, okay, well, this is pretty wet right now. I decided, for example, that I need some blue sky reflection in here. It looks good if I carry that blue area back over further. However, I didn't really paint much blue in there to start with. So what I'm going to do is wait for this yellow-orange to dry. Anybody got a hairdryer? That way I can sort of speed things up. Oops.
Put it on the floor. Thank you, Nancy. I don't use this on my hair, just
Oh,
Reach that from
well,
There's a power strip way back here that I don't know if that's
way back there.
Oh my God.
Oh, I don't see any glow. It doesn't look okay. Yeah.
They're still on.
You okay?
Yeah.
Did you get it on that side?
Nancy's gonna fetch a cord.
can reach from here, though.
Nancy has a cord. Nancy has a cord.
There is a cord.
Don't panic.
It's not, this power strip isn't on.
But isn't it with the whole?
That would explain why the hairdryer isn't on.
Here's it.
She's bringing a cord here.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, is the plug going
It's
this
okay.
way?
You got it. Do you need to bring it somewhere else or you good?
This should work.
It's not working?
I don't know. Where, Jerry, where is the on button?
Well, the power strip's
all
what's
the way
running
down
the
to this end,
TV,
it should be
so.
full force.
There's a plug-in right on this wall, right over here.
Give it here and I'll just plug it in over here.
Test it.
But it's what's running the TV,
Is
it's
it
the
sure?
TV cord, so it's gotta be on.
Where's the on-off button?
Oh, if we talk long enough, it'll drive by itself.
David, in the reflections that reflect the cliff, the light area, does that follow a rule about darker color inside or outside, like you were saying the blue did?
It will, but what I have to do this in a certain order. First of all, I've got to put the blue in here, because what's going to happen, eventually they'll get that to run. Okay.
I planned this.
You want the cliff reflections to have real sharp edges up against this blue, so you paint them over top of the blue. Okay. Now, I just put in sort of a layout of where the cliff reflections are going to be, because I know that there are some places like here that I'm going to be painting in blue because I wanted blue there and it's not there. So after everything's dry, I'm going to wet that paper and drop in some blue in here and there and there and there, you know, strategic places. Then I go back and paint the cliff reflections over top. When I do that, when I sort of formalize the color in the cliff reflections, then I'll go back and, like, this dark is going to be reflecting down into here and this dark reflecting down into here. And they'll get darker as you go down. In fact, this down here is going to be almost black.
Okay, but the inside of this area here doesn't necessarily follow a rule that it's darker, like you said, the sky directly above that?
No, you're not going to notice it too much.
Okay, so it would be just, you're doing more
it's just,
what you're kind of seeing.
Just darker. I mean,
Okay.
it's just going to be this color.
Okay.
But it's got to be dry before I do this blue thing. You know, everything has to be in a certain order.
Different guy?
Maybe
I
it's
will
the
go
blow
ahead and
dryer.
start.
Let me turn it on off. Where's that on?
I'll start over here,
It's stuck.
since this is dry. We seem to have a hair dryer technical glitch.
That switch is stuck.
Okay,
It's not all the way up.
I'm wetting this blue area, the whole thing. Okay, just putting some water on it.
You know, when you say darker, are you saying darker than each other, or darker than the top part, or darker than what?
Now I'm confused.
That's not fair.
How can you be darker than each other? I mean,
Well, I
that
don't
only
know.
works, well, never mind.
Well, darker than the next wave.
Darker than the other.
Darker than the top or the bottom of the waves.
That place is darker than that place. Does that make sense? That's what I mean. This
Okay.
is darker than that.
than the next set of water. Okay.
Okay.
That's darker.
That's darker
That's
than
darker.
all of them. Okay. It's also brighter.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to stay quite that dark. But I did want the bluer area in there, you know.
Tell me where the blue,
Now,
reflection, tell me where that blue came from, when in essence, it's the space where there is nothing but rock in the real world at the top.
hmm.
The front of the wave is reflecting.
It's the curve of the wave.
Okay.
Now I
It's
didn't quite
reflecting.
follow this, but are you asking why, for instance, there will be blue in here when if it were a mirror reflection, all you would
Yes.
see is rock?
Yes.
That's because the wave is facing away from you
And picking
or
up
towards
its
you. And in this case, where you see the blue, it's facing towards you. If you had a little makeup mirror and you held it flat, you'd see the cliffs, but as you turn it towards you, you'd see the sky.
Okay. All right. How many times did it go?
Oh, I will.
Oh.
It fits into it.
All right.
Just deal with and look at my taking
Well, I may not remember here now, but every time I'm so excited.
Now, while we were having those questions, I sort of was doing something you probably ought to pay attention to. And you had those exercises that I gave you, and there was one, what I call dry into wet, I think. I did like a sort of a Japanesey foliage in the fog kind of thing. That's the technique that I'm using here. I wet the paper, and then I just get some blue, and the brush is fairly dry, and I do this. Now, if you do that and you stop, it leaves a dot. But if you just kind of keep brushing over it, you can get a nice smooth line. See, and I do it right in the center of that reflection area, and that leaves that very slightly paler area up near the rock reflection. That makes sense to
Mimics
everybody?
that paler sky against the
Yeah.
horizon.
And that takes a little bit of just practice to be able to do that quickly and keep it right in the middle of that line. Sometimes I'll stick a finger down here if I have a horizontal wave so that I can have something to rest against. Some people would use a block, a bridge or something, you know, to hold their hand on. But it is, when you have a very long one like that, there's a little bit of manual dexterity that you have to keep right down the center of that thing. And it helps to practice, because when you're doing it on the fly like this and the paper's wet, you can't take your time and do this, because when you do that, it leaves these little dots. It's got to be a fairly smooth strokes. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, when you get up higher, in practice, you can't even do the dry and the wet, because the detail starts to get so small that there's really no point in trying to soften edges that when the whole thing's only a 1/16 of an inch wide. So I painted in the blue here because I knew I wanted some blue spots. That would be places where the water faces up towards you in the wave. You happen to get a little steeper wave, and so you get a little sparkle of blue sky back here where you wouldn't normally have seen it if the water were flat. So I'll get all the blue things painted in, and then I paint the cliff back over the top of them. Whoa, that's a little dark. One of the things you need to develop in pretty much any kind of watercolor is the ability to see right away whether something's too dark, too light. You put it on the paper because you have a limited amount of time. There's a little window of time that you have to fix something if you put dark paint on the paper. Sometimes that window of time is 0 and you're just shot. But in this case, I had to go, I said, oh, it's too dark, and you have to do it right away and say, no, I'm going to get rid of it now.
He needs some more water.
Could you get me some? I won't do anything till you come back. It's better than, me getting up and disconnecting and all that. Okay, let's see here.
So as far as your ticking, are you looking at that as you're putting in these little lines? Does your ticking?
I looked at it when I put in these lines.
Okay.
And these lines. I'm not looking at it right now.
Okay.
Since there's not going to be any blue up here, I don't have to look at the ticking right now. If there's going to be any spacing I need to worry about, it'll be spacing between the darks and the oranges and the cliff.
Thank you.
Oh.
Here I needed it because I'll be putting blue, say, in here. And then there's going to be this purpley cliff reflection. In fact, what I can do, this is darker than the sky. So I could actually, in a sort of labor-saving thing, I can put in a blue cast over the whole thing here. And then I'll just paint the cliff reflection, that purple stuff right over it.
God.
Okay? And I keep telling you, it can't hurt you. I mean, it's like, am I going to get electrocuted if I put it in the wrong place? No, it's a piece of paper. And a little bit of your time. I mean, it's a big deal. Well, thank you.
What he did while you were away was he put that great
Yeah.
big blob of milk in there.
After he said he wouldn't do anything, that's what he did.
I just, I painted a little faint blue over everything.
Just killed it.
Oh, right here, Because it's going to be mostly blue. Okay, but now that everybody's here again, and thank you again. You know, if I don't have water or something, my voice just goes totally south.
Yeah, totally south always seems to be a bad thing.
Is that the
Oh.
woman from Baton Rouge?
Can
No,
understand.
there's no insult intended.
Like you live south of here.
Corpus Christi. Totally south.
Yeah, that is pretty south.
I always
Okay.
deal with plain Jane, this plain Jane there.
Say what? Hmm?
Oh, I deal with the phrase plain Jane. We're just
Oh.
gonna do a plain Jane passage here, or a plain Jane something or other. I've been called plain Jane all my life, and it's like, I just
okay, I
kind
know
of
the Debbie
stay
Downer
plain.
They're wrong.
There's nothing plain about Jane.
Pay no attention to them.
That's right.
Prove them wrong.
So you're just tinting
Of course,
the lighter areas
Because that,
yep.
with the value passages in the rock.
I'm just sort of sneaking up on this here. But as I said, what's going to happen in this area is you're going to have a sort of a plaid. You're going to have vertical stripes. You can see them in the photograph, all those vertical stripes. And so I'm putting them in with a flat brush. And then later on, after it dries, I can actually go